It's a four-nation frenzy across the country and across the world right now. And as we get set for Thursday's championship game between the USA and Canada, the entire world is going to be watching. So I asked the question, can other sport leagues, can other sports learn some lessons from what hockey is doing right now? We're going to talk about that in just a moment on the Denver Sports Podcast. Welcome in, everyone, to the Denver Sports Podcast. I am your host, Christian Saez. We've got Justin, we've got AJ, almost a full crew from the hockey guys coming and hanging out on the show. We're missing Nate, but yeah, it's good to have you guys on the show. Thanks for stopping by. We're talking a little Four Nations frenzy going on in the pod. AJ, first of all, I don't think I've done a show with you yet, man. Glad to have you joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I have not had a chance to get onto too many of these lately, so always fun.
Oh, it's fun. It's good. I'm glad. And Justin, pleasure as always. You and I have done a couple TDSPs over the last few months, and a pleasure as always. But we've got a lot to talk about because there is some crazy good hockey being played across the world right now. And I got to say, from my perspective to start, because I come into this being someone who enjoys hockey, but I wouldn't consider myself a die-hard fan just because I grew up in Seattle. We didn't have, NHL hockey until really the year that I left to come to Colorado. And so I'm a more recent die-hard hockey fan as of late. And when we went into the Four Nations and when we kind of learned about what it was going to be, I think the tone around the hockey world was uneasiness, nervousness about like the health of the players, what this tournament was going to look like. And I could say from my own personal experience, I mean, those feelings are still there. However, the tone has shifted for me when you saw specifically Team USA and Team Canada going head to head and all of the chaos that ensued from that. So I'm all in on it at this point, and I want to get your guys' take on this to start. AJ, I'll start with you since you're joining me for the first time. When you entered into the Four Nations and you saw what this was going to look like, what was your tone like going into the tournament versus where are you at vibes-wise on the tournament now?
I didn't care. I'm a notorious fun hater, and I was annoyed that the Avs, instead of getting a break, we're going to have to play a bunch of extra games. So I didn't care at all. And the games have been great. So that's what I get for hating fun. The games have been great. The players have been invested. They've been bought in. I think this has been an unequivocal success for the NHL. People outside of the hockey world have all started to care about this. There are a lot of factors about why that's the case, but they've started to care a lot more about something they otherwise would have completely ignored. And it totally engulfed and overshadowed whatever that was the NBA All-Star game. So it was... I'm talking about it like it's past tense, like it's over. There's only one game left, but it has been a huge success for the NHL, and I think kudos to them. They got one right.
Yeah, Justin, what about you? I mean, I know, like I said, everyone's tone was different. AJ comes from more of the skeptical or skeptical might have been the right word for that. But what was your vibes going into it versus how you've reacted since seeing everything?
I was excited, but I love all international hockey. I mean, I had a poster of the movie Miracle in my room growing up, and it made me kind of a Team USA dork. So I always embrace all these opportunities, and there just aren't that many chances to see some of the top stars in the world represent their country. And so I would say I was pretty excited from the get-go, but it's most certainly exceeded my expectations. It's kind of sad that essentially just trying is such a surprising element of a exhibition or an all-star event that like all of us are juiced just because it's like, oh man, they actually care about something. But it's it's been really cool. And like AJ said, I think it's just been a massive success for the NHL. I don't think they could have had much more of a PR win than having US Canada go up head to head with, like you said, just a terrible, unwatchable product in the NBA All-Star game. And I used to love the NBA All-Star weekend, but again, it just comes down to nobody of note participating and nobody giving even remotely an ounce of effort. So maybe the bar's not that high, but I'm into it.
Well, and this is going to be the theme throughout this entire show, is that the players are obviously 100% bought in. And that's, I think, where all of the other sports are lacking, is that you just don't have this buy-in. Even at most, guys that are kind enough, like Jokic or, players like that are kind enough to like go out and kind of try a little bit, or at least like have some fun. It's still not 100%. The NHL players that we're seeing, every single person that steps out on that ice is giving 110% of their effort, because they're playing for something that means more than just them. And that's what we're going to go into as the show progresses. So, we're going to talk about, obviously, what the Four Nations tournament, the Four Nations face-off has been, and how it kind of got to this spot. But I also want to talk about how this is going to relate to other sports, because we're in this spot, I think, across almost every sport. And I would actually even throw baseball into there, a sport that historically has had one of the better all-star formats across all of the other sports. But it's a tipping point for a lot of leagues around, what do we do? This is just a waste of time almost. No one's watching this. And how do we make this better? So that's kind of what I want to focus on for this show, is how do we take what we saw in the Four Nations face-off and translate that into other sports. But before we go into that, there's one key part of this that I think we have to at least set the stage with, and that is the injury aspect of this, because it's why everyone, all of us, especially coming from an Avs perspective, where we have a lot at stake here with a lot of our really good, talented players playing in this tournament, we have a lot to lose if one of our guys, God forbid, went down or goes down. So I asked the question, if a player were to get hurt, Devon Taves, McKinnon, Makar, any of those guys, if a player were to get hurt, does your tone change on the success of this tournament moving forward?
I think I just think that you inherently have to accept that it's part of this process. A few years ago was a long time ago now. John Tavares blew out his knee at the Olympics, and the Islanders lost their best player. He was just done for the rest of the year. Now, nobody cared because the Islanders weren't competitive enough for it to matter, but it's just a reality of, if you're going to go out there, and hockey is such a game of passion, that you're not going to go out there and go through the motions. You're not going to go out there, and treat it like an all-star game, because the 3-on-3 all-star games that they've been doing, hockey fans don't like those. We're not a fan of any of that. That's not fun. But this is like real hockey, and because it is real hockey, because it's meaningful to these guys, you just accept that that is a, I don't know. I don't. It's just part of the deal. You signed up for this. Like, you're not going to be able to get both an entertaining product and remove the element of the possibility of injury. It's just part of the product.
Yeah, and I feel like it's almost a trade-off where, obviously as Avs fans, if we were to lose one of our best players, even temporarily, like that would be a huge loss to us. And so we would be very specifically focused on that. But I think in the grand scheme of things, there's this general trade-off of, you're getting Stanley Cup level intensity from these players and games that mean immensely more than what we see at this time of the year in any sport. And the trade-off to that is that, that sometimes comes with a cost. I remember looking back, if you're talking baseball, like Edwin Diaz, the star closer for the Mets, got hurt in the celebration of the World Baseball Classic, and he ended up having to miss the entire season for the Mets. That obviously sucks, but that didn't take away from the fact that the WBC was electric and people were 100% bought in and the players were bought in. So there is that buy-in to that. And Justin, I know, you've been covering the Avs just recently and you've been a fan your entire life. I would imagine that if you would ask these players face to face, like, hey, obviously you don't want to get hurt, but like if that is the trade-off of getting to play in a tournament like this, like they would kind of understand. Like I would imagine that would be something that they would understand.
Yeah, I mean, there's just inherent injury risk, like AJ said, and that comes with the territory of actually trying and having these guys compete and play real hockey. And if the worst case happens, it's easy to then say this is why you should never try, but also at the same time, like, you could get hurt in practice. You could get hurt in a meaningless Tuesday night game against somebody from the Eastern Conference where the game's over. Like, it's just a part of it. And I'll take that risk in knowing this is the product that we're going to get, because maybe I'm a romantic when it comes to this type of stuff, but I think it's cool to take passion and take pride in playing for something bigger than yourself. Like, I'm a big college sports fan. Back in the day before all these guys were, making a ton of money, the whole concept was kind of like playing for something bigger than yourself, playing for your schools, playing for your community. And there's no level bigger than that, than the international stage when it comes to sports. And so, like, yes, we could all sit here and act like GMs and be like, what if? Or we could look at it like we're hockey fans and be like, this fucking rules, seeing Nathan McKinnon and Sidney Crosby play on the same team.
Yeah. And that's the aspect of it that's just crazy to me. And again, I use the example of the World Baseball Classic because I think there is some overlap between baseball and hockey from the similarities in how these tournaments stack up. But like, it's just, you're getting to play for so much more than what you would normally get to play for throughout the season. And I always hear this narrative that like the All-Star game isn't about the fans. It's not about the players. It's about, it's about the league just making money. It's just an avenue for the league to make money. This feels like it's for not only the fans, not only the fans, but also the players. And so that's the part of this that I think it really changes the dynamic for everything, is that it's like the players have so much more to play for. Even the hype video, when you watch the like opening before the game starts, is like the players walking in and seeing their name on, a Team Canada jersey, Team USA jersey. Like that means so much more to these guys than just getting to play a, best versus best all-star game where you're just trying really hard not to get hurt.
Yeah, this point is especially salient because this generation of stars has never gotten to do this before. They have not been allowed to go and play at the Olympics in a decade. Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar have never gotten to do this together. The best that they've gotten is a couple of World Championship appearances over time. Gabe Landeskog was super hyped when he helped Team Sweden win World Championships a few years ago, and Avs fans do not care. We did not get neat. I'm happy for you, Gabe, but it was irrelevant in the big picture because World Championships is a joke and nobody takes it that seriously. This is different. This is very different. This is best on best. This is not, here are the guys that are getting to play in this tournament because their teams are out of the playoffs or didn't make them in the first place. This is best on best. Every one of these four countries got to load up with the best that they had that was available. Unfortunately, Finland really got jobbed here with the injuries that happened right before this tournament, but we have not gotten to see these generations get at it. And I think that's one reason why the passion has been what it is and this intensity has been what it is. There are geopolitical things that are happening between the United States and Canada right now that have increased this intensity, that have made this a much bigger deal than it otherwise would have been. In 2 years, in 2028, when they do the World Cup, which will be the follow-up to this tournament, they do the World Cup, and it's kind of the same thing here. It's not going to be the same level as this because this has been a perfect combination of a lot of factors that have all come together at one time to make this what it is. It's going to be hard to replicate all of this, but in the moment, it's great.
Yeah, and that's the part of it, is that it's hard to replicate, and you almost have to sit back and say, like, I'm going to enjoy this for what it is. I'm seeing in the Toyota chat, no injuries Thursday, please. Like, I get it. I'm with you guys. I don't want to see any of those guys go down either, right? I know. That's the vibe for all of us. And, not but, and this is some beautiful hockey that we get to watch. Thursday is one of the most anticipated games I have looked forward to of any sport this year. And that's saying something. Like we're talking football, basketball, baseball, like all of the sports. And this is one of the biggest games that I'm looking forward to. And I have a freaking college basketball game that I got to call. Don't even get me started about that. After the break, though, we got to take a break. I want to ask the question, like, is there changes that the NHL should make to their structure? Because AJ already talked about, hey, this is only going to happen every handful of years. Do we want to keep that format the same? Do we want to make it more consistent? Does that kind of make it more saturated if you make it every year? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But before we get into that, got to give some love to our buddies over at Breckenridge Brewery, Breck Brew, right down the street from where I live, actually, in Littleton, just kind of near that Arapahoe Community College. If you haven't been there, go check them out. They've got some incredible craft beer, our favorite craft beer here at DNVR. They've got beer for any occasion. And, we're talking about the Avs here on the show. I got to say, like, my favorite beer, and I'm not even just saying this because we were talking about the Avs and hockey and all of this stuff. When I moved to Colorado, I got exposed to Avalanche Amber Ale while I was getting my first real taste of, like, NHL hockey during the Avs Stanley Cup run. What a blessing that was. And the Avalanche Amber Ale was like the beer of that championship for me, the beer of the Stanley Cup for me. And so ever since then, I have just been all in on the Avalanche Amber Ale. Anytime I'm downstairs at the DNVR bar, I'm hitting up one of our awesome bartenders and grabbing some Avalanche Amber Ale. But they've got Mile High City, Broncos Country Pale Ale, Fun Slinger, Good Company Hard Seltzer, all the good stuff. And right now, they are giving away an incredible Ice Deck giveaway here. 2 VIP tickets on the glass, complimentary food and drink, March 28th versus St. Louis. You can watch their goalie hopefully give up a bunch of goals on Thursday in the Four Nations Championship. But check that out, breckbrew.com/ice deck to enter. The link will be in the show notes as well. Well, we also got to give some love to our buddies over at Bet365, because at Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe every single sport should be epic. And right now, sports are epic, guys. I mean, I know there's not a lot of sports happening right around this time of year. All-star breaks, NBA's taking a lull, baseball still hasn't started yet, football's done, hockey's taking a break with the Four Nations, all of that stuff. But that doesn't mean there's still some incredible opportunities to get on board with Bet365. Download the app, use that code DNVR365 when you sign up, deposit $10, choose between either a bet and get offer by placing a bet of $5 or more, getting $150 back in bonus bets, or a first bet safety net offer by placing a bet of up to $1,000. And if your qualifying bet loses, you receive a match refund in bonus bets. Check out those odds coming up on that Thursday the Thursday Four Nations game coming up here, because it's gonna be a pretty big game. You might be able to get some money out of that over with our friends at Bet365. Must be 21 or older, physically located in Colorado. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, back here on the Denver Sports Podcast, Christian Saez, AJ, Justin hanging out with us. For those of you joining us from the normal Avs pod, audience, Rudo will be. I'm guessing he's going to be on the pod later today. Is that correct? Okay, so you're
Correct.
you're without Rudo on this because this is the Denver Sports Podcast. It's a little bit of a subset of all of our sports podcasts here. We cover kind of the more general topics across the sports world, but we are talking Avs and hockey today. And I brought up this question before we jumped to break about, would you do anything differently in the long-term format of this? Because the Four Nations has been an incredible success, a sweeping success for hockey, for fans, for all of the hockey world in general. But like you said, it's happening this year. Then we have the Olympics next year. And then it's the World Cup, I believe, World Champions coming up the year after that. And then the year after that, it goes back to Four Nations, if I remember correctly. Or is this just a one-off?
So it goes Four Nations this year, the Olympics, and then the All-Star Game, and then the World Cup, and then the All-Star Game, and then the Olympics again.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is to do international best on best every 2 years. Between the Olympics, then the NHL will put the World Cup back on.
Sure. So, I think the idea of that is there. The idea is to kind of keep it spread out. Not every single year. You don't want it to get saturated. You don't want to feel like, this is just becoming a normal thing and then, it becomes less exciting. But do you like the format that we have? Do you think it's even going to be possible to go back to the All-Star game after you've seen what they've done here? Justin, I'll start with you on this one. Do you think the All-Star game is going to have any weight for hockey fans after what we just witnessed this year?
It's certainly going to lack juice. I mean, I guess it depends on what the format is. Are they going back to 3-on-3, not playing real hockey? Then I don't think it's going to be all that rewarding or all of that enjoyable to watch. Who knows? I guess a lot can change in a couple of years. Some of the skills stuff is fun, much like the slam dunk contest and the home run derby. Like, there are elements of it that I think are fun. It's fun to watch Chara, do a 200-mile-per-hour slap shot or whatever. But I don't know. After seeing this, and then especially after seeing the Olympics on top of it, I just don't think it's gonna have a whole lot of juice going.
Yeah, well, and all the other sports are in the same boat. I mean, and the other sports, to be fair, haven't had this level of intensity. Even the Olympics, which I felt like the Olympics for the NBA or for basketball felt a little more rejuvenated this last year than it has in years past, where the USA just swept the floor with all of the opponents. Like, we loved watching Serbia versus the US and like getting to kind of watch the dynamic there and all of that kind of stuff. But still, it's just not the same. This has been totally different. But Ilson makes a good point in the Toyota chat. It's less exciting like the outdoor games have been. When you do something every single year, it loses its luster and you no longer have the excitement factor. And on top of that, like AJ said, it's kind of a perfect storm right now. The political climate, there's no other sports happening across, that's worth competing with right now. It is just perfectly primed to capture all of our attention across the entire world of sports right now.
Yeah, I will say though, about this, doing it annually will cheapen it a little bit. Look, the World Junior Championships happen every year, and everybody gets hyped as they can for that. And it's all the United States has won it twice in a row. And I like to remind my Canadian friends about this because it's a big part of their personal identity. And that's, that's the thing, is that WJCs happens every single year and it's always fun. It's always hype. And it's always a chance for Canada to reassert their dominance. And when they don't, everybody gets excited. And when they do, we all shrug and go, yeah, you're Canada. You have to do this. So, I don't know how much it would really cheapen it. I do think that it is going to be tough going from this Four Nations into the Olympics next year. Nathan McKinnon, he only needs a gold medal to join the Triple Gold Club, which has 3 members in it. Not many. I actually don't know how many people are. It's rare. And it's just because he hasn't had an opportunity to do it. So the Olympics is going to be a super hype thing next season. And then after that, we're just going to go back to, here's this passing competition that they've come up with. And hey, Connor McDavid won the skills competition that he literally designed. Neat.
Yeah. I'm with you, man.
When Justin says it lacks juice, it's 100% the perfect way to describe this. Because then the next year, we're all going to be super hyped going back to international competition. Just do it every year.
They're going to be feeding us some. They're going to be feeding us some bland water that All-Star year. Justin, were you saying something?
Oh, I just think the benefit that you have with international competition is there's an inherent storytelling process that goes along for months and months. All-Star games are one-off. There's no build-up. There's nothing to them. I mean, I guess in the NBA, we kind of pretend like we care who gets the most votes, and that's kind of a build-up for the All-Star game. That's basically been manufactured because the game sucks and there's nothing else to talk about. But with this, imagine, for instance, if the U.S. wins again. If they win this game on Thursday, that's a rivalry it's always a rivalry, but that's a storyline that then carries over into the Olympics of, can Canada redeem themselves, or can the U.S., punch up again? And if they win the Four Nations and then the U.S. wins gold, what does that say about the state of hockey? And there are all these little storylines and all this drama that can tie up into it that just makes it more interesting. And the All-Star game has none of that, on top of just not even having the baseline for, is this an interesting product, which is do the players actually want to be here or not?
Well, and that's the interesting part. I genuinely feel like, yes, okay, you're going to lose some of its luster if you're doing it every single year, if you're doing international competition every single year. But who cares? Even a watered down version of the Four Nations or, the Olympics or whatever is still better than the All-Star game. Like, that's still 100% better than what we're getting on those off years. Not a single person is going to be watching during that off year. So put it on my screen every single year. Like Justin said, let the rivalry kind of build up. Let it become something consistent. I'm all for that. Hockey is an international sport. It's not like football, although football's slightly becoming an international sport, but it's not even close to being there yet. Hockey, baseball, obviously soccer, and basketball are the international sports. So, embrace that. Allow that to be something that builds your sport, builds your fan base. We have Canadians and, people from Finland and Sweden and the US. I mean, I saw someone throw in there Russia at some point. Like throw all of those markets, those countries, those continents into this conversation and allow us to just love that competition from a hockey standpoint. I just don't see why you would even go back.
Yeah, there are obviously going to be financial reasons for this as well.
Sure.
There's got to be lawyers and money involved in all of this, and I don't think that teams and organizations are going to be comfortable putting their players out there on an annual basis of, hey, let's put potentially our Stanley Cup run at risk so that these guys can go out there and play for their country. But to make the All-Star break interesting, you have to get the players to care. To get them to care, they have to play for something that they care about. That's their country. It's not the Central Division. Because that's how the NHL All-Star game is. It's broken into divisions. Nobody cares. Give me a break. Yeah. Stop. But I do think, I would do it every year just because, I went from not caring about this to being like, this is the obvious answer. But it will be, I'm just saying, it will be really hard to go in 2027 to go back. It's going to be really tough to go back.
I know it is. It really is. And, I feel like if you have something that's working, why change it? Why mix things up? And I also think, hockey is blessed in the sense that it's one of the few sports that I think can actually consistently do this. And we're going to talk about that, after our next break. But there aren't really a lot of other sports, even some of the more internationally focused sports, that can recreate this. Allow this to be something that builds your sport. We all know that hockey has been growing, especially over the last 10 years, last 5 years specifically, immensely. But, it's still a few rungs down from some of the major sports financially, like football, basketball, those kind of sports. So allow this to be something that sets you apart, where it's like every single year we're going to have an international aspect to this game, and it grows the game every year. I would imagine that there are casual hockey fans that are going to be tuning in on Thursday to watch the Four Nations Championship just because it's Team USA versus Canada. That's just the reality of how the sport grows. So I think from that aspect too, it grows the game. Why stop it?
Because you need a commissioner that embraces that mentality.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't even be a question in the NFL if they saw this type of success rate. Roger Goodell would make it happen because his whole job is to think through the lens of what is best for the league and the sport as a whole, and not necessarily, what is best from an injury risk standpoint for each individual team. And I think AJ's spot on in a sense of, I think if you ask any of these team owners or GMs, there'd be a level of uneasiness and just everything we talked about at the beginning that comes with the inherent risk of actually strapping up and competing and playing hard the way they have been. But I also would argue, like Christian said, do you want the sport to grow? Do you want what's best for the sport? This is what's best for the sport.
Yep. I totally agree with you. Well, hey, after this next break, we got to take a quick pause, but after this next break, I want to ask the question of, can other sports replicate this? Is there something the NBA can do to build off of this? Major League Baseball, even football. We'll throw that in the mix in there in just a moment. But I got to plug some of our upcoming events to kick things off here. Specifically, an event that speaks to you hockey fans very greatly. February 28th, 5 o'clock p.m., we've got what's considered a top shelf event. DNVR Avalanche Suite Takeover taking on the Minnesota Wild, which is going to be a pretty incredible matchup here at Ball Arena. That's going to be a blast. I know the Avs guys are going to be hanging out. Justin, I know you're probably going to end up having to cover the game and, not get to be in the suite, but our hearts are going to go out to you because you're doing some heavy lifting down there covering the game itself. But everyone else, you guys are going to be hanging out there, getting to meet fans. Be sure to check that out. It's a good time every single time we have this event. And I did hear from our events guy, we do still have some tickets available, and these tickets are going very, very quickly. So if you have not signed up for that already, if you've not jumped on that board, you get a party bus going to the event. You get to hang out in a suite, food, drinks, good vibes, good times, getting to meet some of the fellows, some of the DNVR folks. It's just going to be a great experience all around. So check that out. Head over to thednvr.com/events to check out all of our events. But be sure, if you're interested in hockey, that's the one you got to check out the most. That is February 28th, coming up, not too far away. Avs versus Minnesota Wild in a suite. We also got to give some love to our friends over at Empire Today. If you are in the market to get your floors replaced, there's nowhere else you should look than our friends at Empire Today. They are the best in the business. They've taken care of our floors here in this studio, in our studio downstairs, in our studio in Phoenix, Chicago, Dallas, Philadelphia. Their arms stretch far and wide. And there's a reason for that. It's because they are the best when it comes to quality, service, and speed. They truly make sure you get the floor of your dreams, or just the floor that works best for you. Even if you're not that interested in getting the floor of your dreams, you just want a really good, sturdy, reliable floor that looks good, feels good, and does what a floor should do. Empire Today, they have you covered. And if you do really care, about how your floor looks, as I do, as many people do when you're going and spending some money on getting a nice floor, check out their virtual floor designer. You take a picture of your living space, you get to see what that floor is going to look like in your specific living space. So check them out. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners of this show can receive $350 off when you use promo code DNVR. Restrictions apply. See empiretoday.com/DNVR for details. All right, back here on the Denver Sports Podcast, Christian Saez, AJ, Justin, hanging out with you guys, doing a little preview pod to the Avs pod that's coming up at 2 o'clock p.m., just about 45 minutes after this show wraps up. And I want to ask the question and kind of pivot here, going from the Four Nations conversation to saying, okay, look, there's pretty much every other sports league freaking out right now, trying to figure out how in the world do we even make our all-star game or our all-star format worth watching. And I think there are a couple sports, maybe even one in particular, that you could even remotely build to look like the Four Nations, and that's baseball. So I asked the question, on social media the other day on our DNVR Rockies Twitter, can baseball replicate what hockey has done in the Four Nations? Because we see the WBC, we see the World Baseball Classic, and in my personal baseball opinion, it's one of the most exciting times every 4 years to watch baseball. It's electric. But is there a world in which we could do something like this, in the middle of the year and make it worth watching? Or is that just kind of a fever dream that we have and it really only works for hockey? AJ, what do you think on that?
I think the WBC is great, but the timing of it has always been my problem with it.
Yeah.
Just that doing it in spring training, there's so much other stuff going on. One of baseball's inherent advantages is that it's taking place while everything else is just kind of chilling. And if you were to do this in the middle of the season, you do it in June, July, you don't have any competition. You do it in the middle of July. You don't have any hockey, basketball. Their off seasons are largely finished. Football, the training camps haven't gotten going yet. Like you do this. You take a week and a half off and you do a miniature version. I would love that, and I would tune in. I would be a lot more invested in that than I would be the WBC, which I like the WBC. It's just the timing of it. I just don't get up for it in the same way. And I guess that's my struggle, but that's where I think this is a nice thing for the NHL, is that it literally is replacing its All-Star break.
Yeah,
Instead
I
of
know.
us wasting time on that, we're getting to do something fun that the hockey world has enjoyed.
And you're competing against, I would argue, the worst All-Star game out of almost any of the major sports, the NBA All-Star game. So there's no competition there. You know, I mean, if you're looking at baseball, you could theoretically you could split it up into 4 teams, give or take. It'd be, Venezuela. They a large chunk of the Hispanic players come from, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, obviously, USA. The fourth one would be tough because, there's a handful of Dodger players that are all from Japan, and they're some of the best players in the world. But you're still missing like Puerto Rico, like some players from Mexico. Like there's a broad, some other Asian-born players too. Like there's a broad element to that. But I agree with you. Like if you give players a reason to play for something that's meaningful, especially in a sport like baseball that very similarly to hockey kind of spreads out across a lot of games. It's not like football where it's just one game and you get one chance for greatness in this moment. Like you can spread it out over the course of a 4-team tournament. I think that has some legs. Give me something that's just that the players and fans are going to buy into. And I don't think baseball's had that since you were playing for home field advantage in the All-Star game. Justin, what do you think?
Pair up with like a professional league in Japan or something like
yeah,
I would be like enough to field a team, to represent Japan. I think, that it'd be fun, even if they weren't necessarily all MLB stars. I know that kind of is going away from it being a true representation of the MLB All-Star weekend, but you would still have all those guys, representing their teams. It's just from a fill it out standpoint. I mean, that's the one challenge with the other sports, whereas hockey, Canada's clearly, the top dog still, or they have been historically, but the level of parity across some of the other countries, the gap just isn't quite as wide as, like it'd be hard to do this. And, it's impossible in football. Basketball, you could kind of do it. I mean, you could probably get 4 teams on a basketball side and make it interesting. But you could also try and do something like US versus the world or something like that. I don't know if you get the same juice in that regard, because like, does representing the world mean, as much to you as representing your country means to you? It's probably debatable. But anything they could do that would be in the vein of the 4 nations face-off would be a significant upgrade from what the All-Star game is now, which is irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing for basketball too. The NBA, there's no depth, there's no weight on the All-Star game, so no one really cares, and the players don't care either. You have to find a way to get the players to buy into this, and I go back to, I mentioned it just a second ago, I go back to when Major League Baseball had their All-Star game determine who had home field advantage in the World Series. Now that's minor, but it's enough to make you slightly interested, because there is something to root for at that point. You could say, all right, I'm rooting for the National League because, it's tough to use the Rockies as an example.
I hope you're not rooting for the National League historically in the All-Star games, but yeah.
True. But you know what I mean, though? Like, it's, like if you're trying to get home field advantage for your team, you're going to be rooting for that specific side. Like, I was listening to Bill Simmons talk about, his takes on how he would make the NBA All-Star game better. And because I think this has been a huge talking point for a lot of the national talking heads across all of our sports leagues is, the 4 nations is crushing it. Everyone else sucks. How do we fix that? He had said the same thing. You put home court advantage in the NBA All-Star game, put that at stake, and it at least gives you a little bit of something to look for. I don't think it fixes it, but it gives you enough to kind of make you, watch it with a different lens.
Well, in the NBA in particular, that they're going to, certainly one of the participants, probably more, are going to have a vested interest in that because they're going to be playing on one of the best teams. Mm-hmm. With baseball, I think it was always tough because it was like, oh, great, the Rockies' one lone representative just gave up an 8th inning home run, and that's going to decide home field advantage for whoever goes to the World Series. Like, that was hard. That was hard to watch, where you were just like this is,
yeah.
And with the
But it was
NBA,
also a
you know
chance to
that
matter as a Rockies fan, too. Like, especially during a time like now when you're a 100-loss team, it's like, well, we're not going to factor into the World Series in any form at all, other than a footnote of how many times the Dodgers beat us. But
Hey, Elias
maybe
Diaz,
we impact
All-Star
home field
MVP.
advantage.
Yeah.
What about a one-on-one tournament in the NBA? Because getting cooked on national TV by another All-Star, it's gonna hurt the ego a little bit.
I saw that. I saw they were talking about that, the potential for one-on-one tournaments, and I agree with Yaya. Like that's an outlet. I don't know if it saves the All-Star game. It feels like it feels like flag football for the NFL. Like we saw flag football come out for the NFL, and you thought like that's interesting because it's a different dynamic and it's more skills based. You're not tackling, like all that kind of stuff. But like after the first time you did it, you just kind of were like, it's whatever. That's kind of how it feels. But I do think that would help. I think that could be better.
I mean, the flag football, just stop with the NFL. Just don't worry about the Pro Bowl. Just name a team, let everybody feel good about it, and that way you don't end up with, the Trevor Siemian Pro Bowl replacement asterisk. Just name a team and stop. Like, it just doesn't work in football. The way that the sport is set up, the injury, the issues that those guys go through, just don't. Like, Robert Edwards' entire career changed and effectively ended because he blew out his knee at the Pro Bowl playing like flag football in the sand or something. Like it was incredibly dumb. And obviously that's like 20 years ago, but just don't with football. Just don't. Just let it be, man. Just let it be. You're fine.
Justin, you and I talked about this a while ago on TDSP. We had an interesting idea on how to make bowl games, because you could throw bowl games, college football, bowl games into the mix here, as they've become meaningless. They used to mean something, but now they're just kind of toss away games. You're not playing your best guys, like whatever. But we were talking about like if you make the bowl game each year for each team, if you make that into your yearly rivalry game, so CSU versus CU, Texas versus Texas A&M, like the UW versus Washington State, like you make that your rivalry game every year. You put your big sponsor on that, so it's the Pop-Tarts Bowl or the Peach Bowl or whatever, and you put the big money sponsors on those games. People will watch bowl games again. You have to set aside the whole qualifying for a bowl game thing. You have to turn that into something else. But if you can make bowl games become the rivalry game that is at the end of every year, still within the season or something like that, that makes bowl games watchable again because the players are now bought in and the fans are now bought in. Like that's the idea you have to have when you go into this.
I just think you have to find a way to create stakes of some sort to incentivize players, incentivize fans, just give us a reason to care, essentially. And whatever you're doing to do that, like I support any type of creative shuffle. But yeah, I think bowl games are a good example of something that used to matter a whole lot. And they've done a good job here of at least making the New Year's Day games matter again with the extended college football playoff. Like there was a stretch there for about a decade where in the 4-team playoff, you had 3 games that mattered in the semifinals and the national championship. And then even things like the Rose Bowl and games that we had traditionally cared a whole lot about no longer mattered. Those games matter again in the college football playoff, which is great. But I also think, like exclusivity, now we're going like way far in the weeds here with college football, but it used to mean something to get a bowl. There were 7-5, 8-4 teams that didn't necessarily qualify for a bowl. You weren't guaranteed one by going 500. And I think having less of them and having them be something that feel like an achievement to reach would be another way to make it seem like, well, at least there's some status that comes along with being in this, other than I went 6-6 in the MAC and now I'm playing Miami of Ohio on the CW at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, man. It's different, and sports are changing. They're constantly evolving, and bowl games are right up there with them, man. It's tough. It's a tough world for college football right now, at least in the bowl game perspective. Hey, we got to take a quick pause to hit our last break, but after the break, I want to make a point of something I was thinking about, of why I think no matter what football, basketball, baseball do to change their all-star game, why I think that will never, ever come close to equaling what we're experiencing in hockey. I'll make that point when we come back. All right, back here on the Denver Sports Podcast, wrapping things up. Final 15 minutes of the show. And I was thinking about this because I've spent a lot of time, a fan of all of the different sports, as have you guys. And so I've watched, baseball, basketball, football, hockey, all of the above. There's a specific reason why I think all of the other three major sports will never, ever have the same feeling that we're experiencing right now through this All-Star week for hockey. And that is because I think there is a different culture in the sport of hockey than there is in any other sport out there, maybe aside from football. Football has a little bit of this as well. There's an intensity to hockey that is just unrivaled across, again, almost any sport. And, when you go and you watch Team USA versus Team Canada, I would say that if you put that in some of the other sports, baseball, basketball, like those kind of things, like you have a certain pride there. We as fans watch with a certain pride, and we're rooting for our country and all of that stuff that goes behind it. But there is an intensity to hockey that escalates this to a whole nother level. And I think you could maybe even make the comparison to like boxing, a team or a boxer from Mexico fighting against a boxer from the United States. There's like a violence to that you feel like this energy. And, when we started off the USA versus Canada matchup, and you had 3 fights in the first 9 seconds of that face-off, and you're sitting there thinking like, this is huge. Like there's just an energy there that I think is hard to recreate. And that's what we've talked about. We've talked about it from, a game standpoint, but I just don't think other sports touch on that same culture, that same intensity that hockey does, to where it's hard to recreate that no matter what you do with the format of your All-Star game.
I think with a big element of this also is that in hockey, you grow up playing international hockey.
Mm-hmm.
It's as you go through the ranks, it's such a huge deal. There are U18s, there's WJCs, there's world championships. Like there are always for the tip top guys, there are always opportunities for them to play international hockey and put on the sweater of their country. And it's such a big event for them, for the players. And the other sports just don't really have that same kind of infrastructure. WBC has built it in to baseball. The NBA just needs to lean into USA versus the world at their All-Star game every year. And with football, again, don't bother. The Pro Bowl's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah.
So it is just a different, like the infrastructure of the sport and the way that they grow up playing it is so different that
that's what I mean. It's a different breed. Specifically, before we change gears here to wrap up the show, I did see that the NBA already announced that they are making changes to next year's All-Star game. They did announce that they're going to do one-on-one tournaments, which, I know. We'll get a big shocker there. I will say, I am slightly interested in seeing how that pans out, just because I agree, like getting cooked 1 versus 1 feels like there's a little more weight to that than what we're seeing now, but it's not much. It's not much. They are going to also be doing an earlier start time. So instead of tipping off at 8 p.m. Eastern time, they're going to be tipping off at 5 p.m. Eastern time, which is right after the Olympics coverage on NBC. So their idea is like, let's kind of piggyback off of the audience that's already watching the Olympics and hope that some of them stick around to watch some of the NBA All-Star game right after that, because those are back-to-back. So that's pretty much the main 2 differences of the NBA All-Star game next year. But again, it just doesn't matter. Like AJ said, it doesn't matter. You're not going to change anything. It is what it is. So to answer the general question that this show was based off of, that today's episode was looking at, can other sports learn from the 4 nations? Sure, they can learn from it. Is there a way they can recreate it? No. There's absolutely no way you can recreate it. The 4 nations is unique. It's a unicorn. It's a blessing to hockey fans and sports fans alike. And we are just so grateful that we get to have good hockey coming up on Thursday. And we're all praying to God that everyone stays healthy. That's the end answer. That's all it is. That's all it is.
Please, the 3 abs in it, please come home healthy.
I know. We're all going to be holding our breath. Hey, I got a question for you guys as we transition into the game itself. I know you guys are going to talk a lot about this on your show as well. Team USA versus Canada. The hype is there. It's going to be at TD, at the Garden in Boston. Is there a better home environment? I guess I'll put it this way. What do you think is the better home environment? AJ, I'll go with you first. Is TD the better home environment in Boston, or is it Bell Center in Canada? What do you think, just by sheer energy?
It's Bell Center. I don't even think it's close. It's Bell Center. That's the way, like, look, I love hockey. I am not alone in loving hockey as an American who loves hockey. It is just not the same. It is part of a Canadian's DNA. It is part of their identity. When the Americans win an international tournament, I get excited because I'm kind of a petty bitch, and I like to rub it in the faces of my Canadian friends. That's about it. It doesn't change that much for me when they don't win them, which is pretty frequently. When a Canadian team doesn't win one of those tournaments, it is an existential crisis, which, again, I'm petty. I find it hilarious. But it means so much to them. So much to them. You look at the 2010 gold medal game in Vancouver between these two teams. Sidney Crosby scores the golden goal in overtime, right? The entire country, like, it was a party because they had to have it. Had the United States won that, it would have just been another gold medal for them, as they racked up a million of them, as they do at every Olympic Games. For Canada not to have won that, it would have been crushing. The United States didn't win. I was bummed. My life has gone on just fine. It is just different. The level of importance is just different. Bell Center, especially in Montreal, that is, those people mean business when it comes to hockey. Boston's great. The fans are great. Like, the intensity is great. That the passion is there. Come on, let's be real. It's just not the same.
Justin, do you think because of the tension that we saw between the U.S. and Canada in the Bell Center, the booing of the national anthem, like all of that stuff, do you think, this is a totally stupid question, but I'm going to ask it to you anyways to start the conversation. Does that raise the energy in TD coming into this game Thursday?
I don't see how it couldn't. I mean, just the way that game was played, even beyond the fighting past the, first 10 seconds, which was just crazy. Some of that's a little bit manufactured. To me, more than the fighting, the pace and intensity of play we saw in that game. I mean, that hit on McDavid in the open ice, like, I thought, is that going to start like a full line brawl?
I
like,
audibly gasped when I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Canadians are going to be out for blood. The Americans are going to be just as amped because they've got a squad full of goons that really embrace this style of play that we've got going between the two. Like, that's kind of what we do. We just kind of beat the hell out of teams, send the Bash Bros at them, and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into this, and that's, again, part of what just makes this whole situation unique and why it's going to be hard for other sports to replicate. And maybe there's more passion in Canada for hockey as a whole, but I do think it is kind of a perfect storm with everything we've got going geopolitically, with everything that happened in this last matchup. You're going to have casuals that are going to be cheering on for the U.S. a lot harder than I think they would have otherwise, and you'll have people rooting against the U.S. harder than they would have otherwise too. So
if
this is everything you could ask for.
If and when the U.S. fans boo the Canadian national anthem, because it's going to happen. I mean,
don't do it.
I agree. Don't do it. But it's, there's no way Boston, the massholes, let that slide. Does Nathan MacKinnon throw hands at some point throughout this game? Do we see a Nathan MacKinnon scrap?
I hope not. Yeah.
He better not. You have Sam Bennett on that team. Let him handle business. You have
I know.
We got to know our roles here. Like, the Nuggets, if getting a beef, I know Jokic has had some moments there, but like, if it came down to it, like, that's not who handles retaliation. Like, you don't have your star guy be the one out there doing the dirty work now. Nate's had some of those moments in his career where he's just decided, I'm going to gonna play make believe and I'm gonna do that. But
I
hope.
If he's gonna do it, he's gonna do it against Clayton Keller because he plays for Utah/Arizona, and that's where he seems to always fight people. So I'm just saying. I will reiterate, he better not. I'm gonna be so mad if he does that.
but if on the spare chance that he does well in the fight, because I don't see Nathan McKinnon not doing well, we're all gonna be as hyped as ever. It's just the going into that you're gonna be like, holy shit, is he dropping his gloves? Like, put him back on, bro. Put him back on. Yeah, that's I think I was listening to someone talking about this too, like when I was passing by them, and they were making an interesting point. I don't remember who it was here in the office, but they were making an interesting point that like it feels like because Team Canada is filled with Avs, that like Team Canada almost plays like an Avalanche style hockey, and that's why they kind of struggled against the like, you know, just heavy hitter American, you know, just kind of scrappy team. Is there any truth to that? Is there truth to the fact that the Avs, like from two people who cover the Avs specifically and break everything down from an analytics standpoint, all that kind of stuff, like, is there truth to the fact that Team Canada might have some of the flaws that the Avs have because of the presence of the Avs on the team?
No.
Okay. Justin, what do you think?
I don't think. I mean, like, you can point to the similarities of like they play with pace because they have some of our fastest guys out there. But like, I don't know. I think this is a matchup that's kind of unique in its own, and like the quirks that happen between this aren't really have much to do with the NHL. It's just a bunch of dudes trying to live it up and, you know, represent their country. So I get the implication. Like, I understand where you're going with it. But I'm with AJ. I don't know how much validity there is to that.
It was good to see McKinnon out there scoring a few goals yesterday too. It's nice to see all that happen. It's one of those things that like, it's like being really nervous for like a big presentation or something like that. And you know, the time leading up to it, you're super nervous. You're like, man, I hope this really goes well. I hope everything's going to go okay. And then you do it and, you know, whatever. And afterwards you look back and you're like, okay, that was really good. I'm glad I did that. It went really well. All that kind of stuff. Like, that's the vibe I'm feeling from the Four Nations right now, where it's like, yeah, there's some nerves. Like, you hope that things go well, knock on wood, for our Avalanche buddies out there. But, you know, we're going to look back and say, man, that was such an electric tournament. That was so much fun. Justin, I got to ask you this, man. Do you have college basketball happening on Thursday? Because Thursday's a college basketball day.
I'm looking out. I got college basketball tonight and Saturday night, so it'll work out schedule-wise. But yeah, I'll be locked into that U.S.-Canada game come Thursday.
Dude, I am so bummed. I am doing a college hoops game at 6 p.m. on Thursday at just same exact time. And I'm like, man, is this one of those games that I have like the game on my phone sitting next to my spot sheets while I'm calling another game? Like, I'm not like that, but it's probably one of the biggest events sporting wise that I'm actually really sad that I'm not going to be able to be like sitting on my couch watching every single second of it. It's one of the biggest sporting events of the year, in my opinion.
You got to go old school, try and go social media blackout, record the game and try and create the live experience by yourself later, which is never as rewarding. But when you can pull it off, it is possible. I've done it for a couple of big events while working games. It's doable.
It's just tough when you're calling the game. Like, that's the part. If I was covering that game, it would be different. I mean, I've watched plenty of Rockies games where I've had some, like, where I'm in the press box and I've got, you know, I even had Broncos training camp like on my phone while I was in the press box at Coors Field because I wasn't missing much. But, you know, so like, that's fine. But it's different when you're doing play-by-play and you have to be like in the nuances of the statistics and all of the, you know, game notes and the players' names. Like, there's such a layer to that. And it's like the first time in my life that I've been like, damn, I'm actually kind of bummed that I'm doing a game. And it's a good game. It's top-rated Northern Colorado, Big Sky championship on the line possibly. So it'll be a good game. But look, I appreciate you guys coming on, hanging out with me. You guys have your show coming up at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 o'clock AJ time. It's going to be a good time. I know you guys always crush it over there, so be sure to check them out if you haven't already. DNVR Avalanche on all the socials. Justin, AJ, thank you guys both for coming on and talking a little hockey and maybe jumping in and diving into some other sports as well. Appreciate you guys coming on.
was a blast, man.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I always like talking hockey.
Always love it. Always love it. Shout out to Yaya for pressing all the right buttons and for you guys hanging out in the Toyota chat as the fans. We'll see you guys next time right here on the Denver Sports Podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.